Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be covering part 1 of matter and its properties. This is part 1 of chapter 1 in my General Chem Spawn series, and I look forward to seeing you guys continue the rest. Anyways, these are the learning objectives we will cover this video. As you can see, these are pretty simple level 1 topics on Bloom's taxonomy scale. If you're unsure what level 1 really means, please check out the overview video for this chapter. It'll give you a good idea of what you're signing up for. Additionally, it's also important to know this chapter is pretty isolated from the rest of the General Chem 1 curriculum. For the most part, after your first test, you won't really see much of this play out, unless your tests are cumulative. Now, phase changes are a bit of an exception. You're going to see them in lab. You're going to see them come up a few times in your General Chem 2 and General Chem 3. Without further ado, let's move on to what is matter. The definition of matter is quite simple. Must have mass, must have volume. There are no exceptions to this, none at all. You probably get questions like, is light matter? Is a photon matter? Or variations of such. The approach is quite simple. Does light have volume? Yes. Does it have mass? No. Therefore, light is not matter. End of story. Now, matter is a pretty big umbrella term. So, we usually like to focus on classifying matter. Now, there are a couple of different classifications. The main classifications we're going to cover on this video is pure substances and mixtures. We will cover physical and chemical properties in the next video. Now, as we can see here, we have a classification scheme. These will be important to memorize for your first test, so I suggest writing this down a couple of times. Now, there are two main classification families, pure substances and mixtures. As you can probably assume, pure substances are made of only one thing, while mixtures are made of more than one thing, hence the term mixture. In these families, we split into two classifications. Let's start out with pure substances. We have elements and compounds. Elements are basically whatever you see on the periodic table. It cannot be broken down into simpler substances. If it's one of the 118 elements on the periodic table hanging in your classroom, it is an element. Let's use helium, element number 2 on the periodic table, as an example. Now, compounds are a bit different. They're a bit misleading. They are still a pure substance, but they're a combination of elements chemically bonded together. Think of a compound as a molecule. Let's look at water as an example, H2O. Water is a mixture of elements. We have hydrogen and we have oxygen. However, it's pure in the sense that if we take a glass of water, it's solely that water molecule. You cannot break it down into something simpler. If you break water, it's no longer water. On the other hand, we have mixtures. First type of mixture we'll look at is the homogeneous mixture. Everything's in the same phase. Everything looks uniform. One good example of this is tea with sugar. It looks the same, seems like the compound in first glance, but if I were to evaporate the tea, I would be left with sugar. This is the clear distinction between compounds and homogeneous mixtures. A compound is chemically bonded, which means if I change the phase, nothing's going to change. It's still going to be that same compound. However, with homogeneous mixtures, if I change the phase, it would start to change its properties. Now, the other type of mixture we're going to look at is heterogeneous mixtures. These are on the non-uniform side, basically things that are easily separable. Now, we usually run into two types of scenarios with questions like this. One is different phases of matter, for example, ice water, which has ice and water, solid and liquid, and immiscible liquids, such as oil and water, which won't mix at all. These are heterogeneous mixtures. There are also things more simpler that are like trail mix, but the basic idea is if it's separable, it's most likely a heterogeneous mixture. Now, there are a lot of complicated gray areas. Don't need to hyperventilate when looking at these. Simply start out with the question, is it a variable composition? In other words, is it a pure substance or a mixture? If it's a pure substance, can we separate them into smaller substances? If so, it's a compound, and if not, it's an element. And for a mixture, ask yourself if it's completely uniform. If it is, then it's homogeneous, and if it's not, it's heterogeneous. You do not want to overcomplicate this. Now the final part we will cover is phases. There are three phases in Gen Chem: solid, liquid, and gas. You should be asked to give some characteristics and distinguish between solids, liquids, and gases. For that, you want to say solids are rigid and they possess a shape, liquids flow and take the shape of a container, and gases take both the shape and the volume of the container. In addition to that, there are some exceptions, and you want to say that an exception might look like sand because it is composed of many small pieces, and it assumes some properties of liquids while it's solid. Another example you can say is clouds, which are a mixture of gas and liquid states. Depending on your professor, you might be asked to give an example of exceptions, but for the most part, you want to stick with solids, liquids, and gases, and these characteristics. Now, it's also important to know that matter can switch between these states. But just because they can switch, it does not change the identity of matter. H2O, aka water, is still H2O when it's ice and water vapor. This is extremely important to know. Now for the changes, you will need to memorize this, so I suggest drawing it out a few times. Solid to liquid is called melting. Liquid to solid is called freezing. Liquid to gas is evaporation. Gas to liquid is condensation. Now the things that are less known is solid to gas. This is sublimation. And gas to solid. This is deposition. You will be most likely asked about this on your first test, so make sure you study. Anyways, that is all for part 1. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.